that blue wave coming? It's coming in Texas. It's coming in Florida. And in the great state of Illinois. Screw the Reds. Once a blue, always a blue. Go blue this November.
Welcome back to the Dormer Politics Podcast. My name is Justin Fisher.
I'm Nolan Flaherty.
And I'm Austin Vertine, and I'm voting Democrat this November.
So obviously, Austin is voting Democrat this coming November, but I think a lot of what is going to determine whether or not there's a blue wave, quote unquote, is whether or not we get young voters out to vote. In recent elections, the youth really haven't come out and voted at all.
Yeah, I mean, for the 2016 election, we saw, a 46% voter turnout of millennials? And in comparison, the 2016 election was a pretty high voter turnout. I mean, you saw older Americans, about 76% turned out to vote. So 46% for a presidential election is rather low, so I can't imagine what it would be for a midterm.
And the Bears yesterday were 1 yard short.
It was literally less than a yard.
They were 1 yard short of tying the Patriots. And I just don't want the same thing to happen to the Democrats. I don't want to come up 1 yard short in controlling the Congress. Okay? I want turnout, young, old, whatever. I just want high turnout because when there's high turnout, Democrats win. Okay? Earlier during this campaign, I said to myself, I'm not voting for J.B. Pritzker. I even wrote like a page for an editorial I was going to put on dormroompolitics.com about it. But I've come to my senses. I've realized that this election is extremely important and that I am voting blue down the ballot.
Okay, wait, let's get this straight, okay? He saw a speech from Barack Obama that inspired him to vote blue, and that's why he's voting for J.B. Pritzker.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, what do you like about the guy? What draws you to him? This is the problem with Democrats and Republicans in these days, is that they don't draw young voters in. We got a big rich guy like J.B. Pritzker. We're all struggling college kids. What as a struggling college kid do you see in him?
Hi, I'm J.B. Pritzker. I'm going to make college more affordable.
Hey, J.B.
That attracts my ear. But on a separate note, as the Obama speech, I had open ears. I had an open mind. And when I walked into that auditorium, I saw J.B. Pritzker with his magnificent hair.
He's got good hair.
Clearly. So much hairspray in that hair, I just want to say.
One of the biggest heads I've ever seen also.
Oh, enormous head.
When I met him,
he's a beefy boy.
He had such a warm personality. You know, he grabbed me with open arms. Not in a physical way, but in an emotional way. He attracted my attention. Okay? And when I asked him for a picture, he gave such a poignant response to it. I asked him, hey, JB, you want to take a picture? And JB told me, we're in this moment, together, in this auditorium.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, I
don't see why we shouldn't take this picture.
Yeah, but not everyone has a personable story like you, where you're just admiring J.B. Pritzker, and yeah, he made you feel good inside. Not everyone has these personable stories, so I think it's hard for young voters to get a grasp on a guy like J.B. Pritzker.
And you're going to be wait, you're voting blue up and down the ticket? Okay, Erica Harold is running for Attorney General, and you're going to vote for Kwame Raoul? Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
Listen, I could say some things that would totally ruin the future of Justin's political career.
Okay. All right, whatever.
About Erica Harold.
All right, whatever. Erica Harold is a queen. It's just a fact. And you're not going to vote Erica Harold. I don't understand. How are you going to rid the state of Democratic corruption, which is, I mean, solely Democrats are the corrupt ones, besides what? George Ryan? All right. I mean, how are you going to rid the state of Democratic corruption by voting, a Democrat into Attorney General? It's ridiculous.
I don't know. Pat Quinn, he was a strong Democrat.
I want a Democratic governor so that we can get policy through, led by Mike Madigan.
Oh, yeah, sure. So then J.B. Pritzker can sign whatever Mike Madigan sends to his desk. It's gorgeous. This is what I don't understand. Is high voter turnout great? Sure, whatever, right? But why should more people who don't know, who aren't informed on the issues, why should they vote? I mean, this is an idea that was held by Thomas Jefferson, too, right? There was the idea that only educated people should vote. He was called outrageous at the Constitutional Convention.
Here's the problem. That's unfair. I think you're ignoring the context of when he said that. He said that in the late 1700s, and the only educated
I think it still has merit.
The only educated people at the time were white men who were property owners. Those are the only people at this country's inception that were allowed to vote. Okay? Now, if we're going to be a free and democratic society and we want to strive to becoming more democratic, right? Because we see all across the country, we see voter suppression laws in places like Georgia and Texas where a lot of Republicans feel threatened by governorships, by Democratic candidates for governor and for Senate, right? And so the Republicans' tactic is we have to suppress the vote because we know that when there's high voter turnout, we're going to lose.
Where is the tactic that we're going to suppress voter turnout?
There's so many. There's so many tactics going on right now. Okay,
Get out of here.
Moving precincts in highly black neighborhoods.
Give me
Okay,
a break.
these identification laws, which by the way, no other country has a problem with this. One, because either they don't require an ID, or two, they have a national ID, something that Republicans have opposed for decades now, of applying a national ID. So when you're born, you have a national ID. Okay.
What is so wrong with voter ID?
Yeah, I don't think there's a big problem with that. It's really me and Justin were talking about this earlier.
Okay, well,
just
think
walking
about. All
the
right, it might not be a problem to you, but think about
Sure,
this. Think
but-
about this. Think about this. Think about this. Okay. If I'm trying to vote, right? Why should I not be allowed to vote simply because I don't have a driver's license? Because I don't know. I don't need a car where I live. You know what I
You
mean?
get a state ID. You don't have to be able to drive to have a state ID.
Yeah, I don't understand how you really function
getting
in
a
How
society.
many times do you have to identify yourself?
All right. Wait
You
a
have to
second.
bring
Wait,
ID
ask me this
everywhere.
question. Ask me this question. What percentage of the population do you think has a state ID?
What
What population? What
The
population
majority of the population has a license or a state ID.
a license or a state ID. I'm talking about state IDs.
Okay. The majority of people have
I
a
would
license.
say
right?
like less than a quarter of the population has state IDs.
That's fine. A lot of these people have licenses, though. You can either bring a license or you can bring a state ID. If you don't want to drive, then you should get a state ID.
Well, we're in Illinois, and there's different rules here. Like, for example, you can register to vote at the precinct location on election day. We're only one of 11 states that allow that. There's other states that make it really, really hard just to register to vote.
How so?
And that's the problem.
Examples.
Wisconsin in the 2016 election was infamous because in Milwaukee there were so many people that were rejected to vote. Reports of like 20 to 30,000 people that wanted to vote were not allowed to vote in Milwaukee.
Why were they not allowed to vote?
Because they didn't have the proper forms of identification in that state. But I'm not arguing. I'm arguing that the identification rules, they're Bush League. They're bullshit. And I'm saying it's a tactic used by Republicans just to suppress vote, particularly minority vote.
Well, I just think that it's
That's
so
a
hard in our
ridiculous
society to function without even having basic identity. So why should... Like, if you can't function well enough in society to get yourself an ID or
I'd
a
agree.
driver's license...
I mean, let's take voting out of the context. Who doesn't have an ID? How difficult is it to go through life without an ID? I mean, you can't get a bank account, you can't get your 401k, you can't get a pension, you can't handle
And
your
also,
finances.
to go along with that, if some of these people that oppose like voter IDs and stuff, I don't really understand it because there's a problem also in our country where dead people are voting. There are people that are dead.
This is
that-
utterly
that
this
are
is utterly
casted-
not true, though.
Wait, hold on. You
People
literally
are
cannot
dead.
survive without
There were only
you can't get a job.
There were 300 cases of voter fraud
That's
in the 2016 election. 300 cases.
That 300
And then
reported
how many,
cases.
There, more than 100
300
million people
reported
voted.
cases.
More than 100 million people voted.
Okay,
out of
one, we're
300.
trying to present the
300
possibility of
reported
future
cases.
voter fraud, okay? Even if you... First of all, it is 300 reported cases. But even those 300 reported cases, we wanted to prevent those, and we want to prevent this mishap in the
I'll
future.
tell you what's the greatest example of voter fraud: the hanging chads in Florida during
100%,
the 2000
you're correct.
election.
You're correct.
Okay,
The hanging
that
chad.
is real voter fraud. Okay,
We totally
with a
forgot
governor
about
that's
that.
the brother of the Republican presidential candidate, and it just happened by coincidence.
I don't think it was
that
voter-
he won
okay.
by a handful of votes.
Do you really think Jeb Bush, okay, was sitting in Florida? Let's make these chads so then people it'll hang off the paper and their vote won't. That's so stupid. Give me a break.
All right, well,
Give me a break.
putting this aside, because I think most people in our generation, 18 to 24-year-olds, have an ID, have some sort of form of identification, have the ability to register themselves to vote. So really, the question I want to know, and I've been asking myself this for years now, I did a whole pretty much research paper about why people 18 to 24-year-olds don't vote and why people are discouraged to vote. But what do you guys think, coming from two different sides, why don't people in our age group vote? Like, what is it about it?
I think they feel a disconnect towards politics. I think that's not something that's limited towards millennials either. I think a lot of people, they just kind of want to go through their own life. They don't really care about the government that's surrounding them. But more importantly, I mean, a lot of these kids, remember, a lot more kids are now going to colleges, so they're away from their hometown. And honestly, a mail-in ballot, it's not too difficult to do, but a lot of them don't want to do it. So I think the inconvenience of sending in a mail-in ballot or coming home to do early voting is just too much for some of these young millennials who are 18 to 24.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about it earlier today. How simple would it be if we could just go online and vote and cast our vote? It would be great. I think so many more people would do it.
Put in my license number, done.
Yeah, I mean...
There was a Stanford study done that was discussing the psychological reasons for not wanting to vote. And the number one reason was cost, either financial or time. This is a Stanford study that found that either the financial cost of registering to vote or simply the cost of time,
poll taxes are
and that
illegal.
many people simply don't have the time to register to vote, is the main reason why people don't vote. And when you translate that to young people, and in particular in college campuses, there's not a lot of time for these people to necessarily go out and register to vote. There's a lot of confusion surrounding it. A lot of people don't know, who do I vote for? Where do I vote for? There's not a lot of communication on college campuses, at least the one I'm on right now at the University of Illinois Springfield. There's not a lot of communication as to where the precinct even is on November 6th.
I think you make a good point, especially the latter half of what you were saying, in that education sometimes is a big barrier to why people don't vote. They don't feel that they don't feel like they're able to make an educated vote. I did a whole study as part of a research project last year where I polled, I actually got 1,008 results nationwide from people in different states, ranging kids from ages 18 to 24. And it found that out of all of these kids, the idea of the study was to have kids answer basic questions about like how voting processes went, basic civic questions that they should know by going through high school civics courses ideally. But a lot of these kids did not get the correct answers to like some of the basic ideas of like how we vote, where we vote, like specific simple questions like that. Kids could not even answer, and I think it's a red flag when a lot of our society doesn't know how voting functions, at least from a young age. Maybe we aren't getting educated enough on who to vote for, what political ideologies are, and I don't think high school education, especially nowadays, is doing enough to get our students to be motivated to vote.
There's also an argument to be made that the candidates themselves, specifically presidential candidates, because they're the ones who usually drive voter turnout, the candidates simply do not, they don't generate enough support. We've seen over the last few years political polarization increase through a myriad of factors such as news media and social media. But we're ignoring the fact that because of this polarization, many people have become one-issue voters.
Absolutely.
And they will either vote for someone because they support that policy, vote against someone because they don't support that policy, and the other person doesn't necessarily support theirs, but because of their opposition against that policy that the particular candidate has, they're going to vote against them. Or they simply don't vote at all because they don't feel like their issue is represented. The main problem here, in my opinion, is that they're voting off of one issue. Yep. I think that that's a product of our system, and I think that if we can eliminate these one policy voters, and it happens all the time, particularly on social issues, on issues such as abortion, civil rights, gay rights. There's a lot of these one issue voters, and not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's a sad case.
Definitely
that our
but
democracy is
sometimes
based
it's almost
that.
A necessity, right? Like if you're someone like me who thinks abortion is murder, then why would you support somebody who is pro-choice, right? So a value that deep and that deep within your upbringing, why would you vote against that?
But at the same time, I think issues of values and morality have been curved towards like party lines, which I don't think that's necessarily right. I think a lot of times parties use like morality issues to just draw in voters, and not necessarily their agenda doesn't necessarily fit the way that they portray their morals.
And hypothetically speaking, you could agree that abortion is murder, and there could be a candidate out there that has your position. But if you only agree with that candidate on 25% of the issues, you're still going to vote for them. But there's other people that aren't going to vote for them just because they only agree with that person 25% of the time, and they agree with the other person, let's say, 10% of the time. And this is the problem, is that we often, too many times, pick between the lesser of two evils. And I think that's an indictment on our two-party system, and it's an indictment on our current political polarization.
Well, I think just in general, when we look at the two-party system, you have just conflicting ideas back and forth. A lot of times it's not compromise. It's either this way or that way. And I think just take it at the most basic level. When you're talking to just two sides of people, if you have two sides opposing issues, just trying to debate your side, you're not really going to get anything done. You're just going to spit your facts against each other and maybe try to make a point, but neither side is going to end up agreeing. But when you have sort of like a round table discussion about the issue, and you're able to see like see both sides, discuss possible solutions, that's when you get the best amount of production. And I think too oftentimes in our Congress, in the legislative branches of our country, we just put each other on two separate sides. And it's just a debate that's not going to end up solving anything in the middle. It's just going to have the two opposing sides just saying their points back and forth. And that's what really bothers me about having two parties, is I feel like there's never any progress and never any give to create a solution that's comparable for both sides.
But I think the two-party system, with all of its grievances that everyone seems to have, it does simplify our democratic process, right?
It oversimplifies it.
But
that's the problem. It creates a binary. It creates a black and a white.
What if you had it more complex, right?
Well, how come it can't be gray?
But what if you didn't have, what if you had a partyless candidate, okay, who, ideally they would just say their issues, the voters would agree with them, and you would vote between two partyless candidates, right? They wouldn't really have any descriptors besides their specific issues, right?
Yeah.
It would make the vote so complex that voter turnout would be driven down. I think that, the GOP and the DNC, they're publishing their platforms every single year, and I think it simplifies it for the voter, and it keeps our voter turnout at 30-40%.
I have definitely thought on like a more broad scale of like, what if there was no political parties? And I think that could be mass chaos in some sense. But at the same time, I think I would actually support something like this, just all the logistics of parties aside, in saying that if you took away the labels of Republican and Democrat, I think you would have a lot more production within our Congress. And you would have people expressing their own thoughts, not just coming from their party lines, just their own ideas on how to solve issues. And it's more problem-solving based than based on two different sides who are often backed by corporations and corporate money, who often influence what their platforms are in general. So I think individual thought and problem-solving as a whole is a better way to take on the issue. But I agree with Justin in saying that parties are definitely the best way we have right now of organizing our political system.
Well, that's a completely different issue, corporate money in politics, and I believe that the two-party system is often culpable for corporate money in politics. But here is why you guys are wrong on abolishing political parties. Political parties, in its truest and purest form, are not a bad thing, right? They're supposed to...
I agree.
No, they're supposed to create debate in between parties, inter and intra-party debate. Right? And it will create the best possible product, right? It's sort of a capitalist system. Eventually, the best policy ideas will win.
Is that true, though? Do the best policy ideas win? Or
according to the voters of the party?
No, but while I agree with that, I feel like the best policy doesn't always win. It's just the majority of who has the majority in the House that wins. Or who has the majority in the Senate that wins.
I'm talking about primaries. I'm talking about primaries.
I'm just talking about policy making in general. Does the best policy always get passed? I don't think so. I think it's based on...
Is that an indictment on our two-party system?
Okay, no. But there's here's the indictment on the two-party system, is that they both have no culpability, and they don't feel responsible toward their voters because they're already established. They feel no other opposition or competition coming from any other party. I'm talking about the parties as a whole, not just individuals who are inside the party now. So there's not a party that is coming and is going to take dozens of house seats, right, that will challenge the status quo between Democrats and Republicans. You see this in parliamentary systems where there's parties that will pop up out of nowhere, right?
And you have a hung parliament.
You have parties like the Scottish National Party that came out of nowhere in the last 10 years in the UK because there was a movement towards Scottish independence and the Scottish people wanted a voice that wasn't the Labour Party back in London.
And you got a hung parliament between the Labour and the Tories.
But here's the thing with that, though, is that will create more debate, and you see in the UK they often get policy done in a quicker fashion because of that. Now, I know there are limits to that
There's other factors to why that happens.
Because of our sort of system, which is very complex and it takes weeks, it takes months to get policy through the House and the Senate, right? But I'm saying that if there were multiple parties, then it would lead to more compromise and less polarization ultimately.
Yeah, I think we talked last week with Jacob Rao, who's a libertarian. I don't really see the libertarians having enough influence on our party system enough. I mean, I don't think we're going to ever see them really win seats. I think that's their goal, to win seats eventually. But I think they're a party that pulls more voters away from the other two parties than they do compete with the two-party system.
I think libertarianism as an ideology is simply, it's too niche of a ideology that will be able to gain traction, right? You don't see libertarian parties in any other area of the world because it's simply people are using common sense, quite frankly, and realizing that, hey, the government has to have a role in our economics and in our social life as well.
But I think the Republicans ideally, I think where conservatism and libertarianism differ, and where the Republicans are ideally supposed to have the same views on government as libertarians, but they don't, except in terms of defense spending, right? I think the Republicans are supposed to have this ideal of a conservative government where that's where they're kind of supposed to bond with libertarians, but I think they differ on their views of society, and that's where libertarians and Republicans kind of have their similarities and differences. But anyway, in terms of getting policy through, maybe you're right. Maybe I think there's other factors in the British Parliament that put policy through faster. I mean, they have a fusion of power, so the Prime Minister is actually working directly with the Parliament. So there is a sense of speed in the United Kingdom's government to push policy through. But that sense of urgency isn't necessarily good, right? So when we push policy through Congress and then we get it signed by the President's desk, to some extent, I mean, it's a good thing that it takes a long time to do that, right? It's a good thing that it takes a long time to get a Supreme Court justice to the seat. If we had this rush, I mean, these policies they have, drastic consequences depending on how large the bills are, right? So if we had this sense of urgency in, how fast bills could get passed, I think we would just see an enormous government that would have, drastic consequences.
Here's why I think multiple parties would also help political polarization, because it's harder to fight two than one. It's harder to fight three than two, right? So if you have multiple political parties, you're eventually going to have to decide who is going to be my bogeyman, who is going to be my enemy, right? So if, let's just say we were to divide the Democrats into two parties, right? A left wing and then more of a blue dog Democrat ideology. And then let's try and divide the Republicans up into a moderate conservatism and then sort of a populist Trumpism alt-right section, right? Okay. I think that two things would happen. I think that one, political polarization would decrease because it's very hard to fight against three different parties and be in complete opposition against all three. And I think it actually will force compromise and at the very worst debate. Right, two, more people will turn out to vote because more people will have a stronger connection with that party.
But now elections are unpredictable.
That doesn't necessarily matter. It should be unpredictable. Every single
it's always chaotic. Right, I mean, the debate stage for the gubernatorial debate is essentially what you're saying, right? You had a libertarian on there, you have a conservative, You have a Republican and you have a Democrat. You
Okay,
have
so
four different parties.
you're just talking about debates, though.
I'm just saying in general, this election, the gubernatorial election, you have four different parties and it's chaos, right? The
But
Libertarians are going to
people
split the
only
vote
know
with the Democrat
two,
and the
though, so that's a
Republican.
false equivalency. I mean, the majority of people in the state of Illinois only know that there are really two candidates.
There's a
running,
lot of support
Rauner
for
and
Sam
Price.
McCann and Cash Jackson in the state of Illinois.
They're minuscule numbers. Let's be real about that.
Okay, but there would still be minuscule numbers even if you split the Republican and Democrat Party into four different parties.
Not necessarily. I think that there would be greater turnout because instead of a Republican who agrees with Republican ideology 30% of the time, maybe they lean closer toward a moderate conservative approach, and then that number starts to increase to 50 to 60%, where they start to agree on all those issues.
But
that'll make them more likely to vote.
I think your goal and what you're trying to achieve, to make it more realistic, I think we should be focusing on primary elections, right? Let's look at the 2016 presidential election. You have 17 Republicans in the debate stage, and you have 5 Democrats in the debate stage. For the Democratic Party, let's take a look at it. You have Jim Webb and you have Lincoln Chafee. Lincoln Chafee was a former Republican. Jim Webb has an A rating with the NRA, right? I mean, you had blue dog Democrats on the stage. And then when you go look at the Republican stage, you have it ranging from Rand Paul to Jeb Bush to Donald Trump, right? You have an enormous variance of conservative Republicans and Democrats on both of those debate stages. So I think if we got higher voter turnout in primaries, more people would be able to get their specific opinions and be able to match that with a specific candidate, and then we would move into a general election.
But I think by having to choose one person in the primaries, especially in those early states when there were still a bunch of Republican candidates, I think that alienated a lot of people on the Republican side initially. I'm not saying that those people didn't eventually support Trump because the statistics show that they did. But it alienated a lot of people because it was this all or nothing sort of system, right? What if we had a system where we ranked our candidates and sort of had a point system, right? So you pick your top 5 candidates, right? 1 being your most preferred and 5 being your least preferred out of the 5 that you like. That could create something where I think that you get a greater representation of democracy.
That's definitely interesting to see. I think that the reason that a lot of moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats, who are often probably would suit the most amount of people in our country, the reason that they don't get any sort of representation, any sort of votes, any sort of chance, is because their party doesn't want them. I mean, their party has to appeal to the hardlining Democrats, the hardlining conservatives, which really make up a lot of percent of the people who vote. You think about the older generation that are just going to be hardcore conservatives at times because they want to keep their entitlements, they want to keep their Social Security benefits, they want to keep receiving checks every month. So, I mean, when we think about trying to get more moderates, I think that's an interesting idea that you bring up, Austin, is that we could have a sort of ranking system. And especially
a weighted primary vote.
That, and especially just going to primaries in Illinois, you have to pick a ballot, either Republican or Democrat. And just being me, moderate, shit on me if you want for being a moderate, but I hated having
zero conviction in moderation.
Oh, okay.
You're literally wasting your ballot.
Yeah, well, you're literally not even agreeing with your party. You don't stand for half of what your party stands for. So,
false.
Talk to me when you are a true Republican.
Come to the
you
GOP.
truly embrace Donald Trump.
We have cookies.
You're Donald Trump's little puppet boy.
I have truly embraced the Democratic Party in 2018. Truly embraced it. I think you've seen it.
That sounds well. We saw at the beginning of the podcast what you had to say.
You literally screamed it.
But
I'm just saying, my ballot is going to be bleeding. It's going to be so red. All right. I mean, we're talking R up and down the ticket.
Literally, Houston is about to get hit by another hurricane. It's going to be a blue wave.
Jesus Christ! No, that's false.
That's
not a hurricane, a tsunami. I'm sorry to all the meteorologists out there.
All right, the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, as we know, we're experiencing. It is horrible in reality, but it is a red tide. Okay, it's coming. It's coming to the south. All right, Texas is staying red, baby.
But what if?
Purple rain.
It's not purple rain.
No,
okay? The Libertarians are going.
We will not
way.
be seeing any purple rain. I don't think.
All right, but let's get this straight. Okay, the idea that Texas is going blue is stupid. Stupid. Ted Cruz is winning that by a landslide.
All I know is that
at least 7 points.
I think that Beto O'Rourke. I'm sorry. First off.
Just say his name one more time.
Beto O'Rourke.
There you go.
It's really a tongue twister.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
These names keep getting more complicated.
It's ridiculous. The Democrats need to choose simple names.
He's put his name on the map, and I think that he's a viable candidate for 2020.
See, no, Ted Cruz got this right. All right, his name is Rafael Edward Cruz. Right, that's a complicated name. It's a tongue twister, right? So he said, "Call me Ted." And it's a simple campaign.
Jon Stewart's last name is John Leibowitz.
Jesus.
So he changed it. He has a stage name. People have stage names.
Yeah, well,
That
I think
Ariana
the
Grande
Democrat-
is not Ariana
I think the
Grande
Democrat-
is not Ariana Grande, you know?
What's her name?
I'm not sure.
I'm just saying the Democrats need to learn stage names. I think they need to learn stage names. And Cash Jackson, that's a stage name. That's not his real name. His real name is Complex. It's a tongue twister.
Anyway, so what we're all trying to say with this whole podcast is that we want you to go out and vote. Whether it's Republican,
Unless you're dumb.
Democrat,
And stay home if you're dumb.
I don't care if you're dumb. Educate yourself. A simple Google search will get
A few
this
Google
done.
searches.
A few Google searches.
I want you to read 10 Wikipedia pages.
And I
before
guarantee
you
you, this Justin Fisher guy didn't even Google search all the opponents that he was going against for the Democratic Party. He probably just filled in Republican for each candidate, not even looking. So
had to. It was the primary.
educate yourselves. Go out and vote. Let's get this done. Let's get people who we want
A little motivation.
in power. A little bit of motivation here from Dorm Room Politics. And we will see you next week. I'm Nolan Flaherty.
I'm Justin Fisher.
And I'm Austin Vertine. Continue to listen to us on Spreaker, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter at Dorm Room Poly. Thank you very much for tuning in.